Next up, we have someone who, when I read their bio, I honestly thought we were bringing Indiana Jones onto the set. But it's not Indiana Jones, it's Chris Kilham. Chris Kilham is a medicine hunter, explorer, lifelong yogi, psychedelic advocate, and media personality. He has investigated medicinal plants amongst indigenous people globally for decades, from Siberia to the Amazon to Congo. He's the author of 15 books, including the international bestsellers, The Five Tibetans, The Ayahuasca Test Pilot's Handbook, and The Lotus and the Bud, Cannabis, Consciousness, and Yoga Practice. The New York Times even calls Chris part David Attenborough, part Indiana Jones. So I knew I was onto something. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much, Natasha. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this group. As you mentioned, I do travel around the world. I investigate medicinal plants of all different types, non-psychoactive, psychoactive herbs and spices, and I help to establish sustainable chains of trade around the world. And no place have I spent as much time as I have in the Amazon rainforest. I've been fortunate to go there about 35 times to investigate more than 15 rivers or so. And from a personal reward standpoint, I've had the unique opportunity to travel with, live with, work with, and engage in ceremonial practices with a great many shamans throughout Brazil and in Ecuador and also in Peru. And so I want to talk a little bit about ayahuasca today. And I also want to talk a bit about keeping the psychedelics wild. In 1967, which seems like a good place to start because that's when I very first ever swallowed 250 micrograms of LSD and had my very first experience with psychedelics. Jimi Hendrix, the guitarist, came out with an album called Are You Experienced? And the thing that was beautiful about that album was everybody understood the question if they were experienced. At that time, there was a lot of LSD going around. People also had some access to peyote. We weren't really turned on to ayahuasca. It is something, as Wade mentioned, that academics and people like Dr. Schultes were onto very, very early. But for most of us, we turned to other things. And it was this experience that informed us and in many ways set a number of us on a different kind of social path and philosophical path than really what was going on with the times coming out of the gray 1950s. And in my time in the Amazon, I've been extremely fortunate to sit in ceremony, in ayahuasca ceremonies with many shamans, some of them Shipibo, some of them Mestizo, different people from different backgrounds. And as Wade mentioned, ayahuasca is utterly unique among all of the psychedelics because it is combinatory. Either plant, either the vine or the leaf, without the other, without this utterly ingenious indigenous pharmacology that somehow put together this spectacular beverage that takes you on a spiritual journey. Without one of the plants, it doesn't work. So it is quite remarkable that we have this assembly of these two plants amidst 80,000 or so. The thing about ayahuasca is that it is, when it is used in a ceremonial setting, at least among many traditions, and certainly not all traditions who utilize ayahuasca, there is a beginning and a middle and an end to it. You engage in this for the purpose of learning something, for the purpose of healing something, maybe for the purpose of gaining insight. In earlier tribal days, perhaps people got together and tried to figure out why somebody was having trouble hunting. It's very different now. Many people turn to ayahuasca for traumas of different kinds, to help to relieve burdens that have maybe been with them their entire lives and they haven't been able to shake. And this is the thing about ayahuasca and about the psychedelics in general as healing agents that I think makes them so dynamic. At their best, they are utterly thorough. They are completely immersive. They leave nothing behind. I do understand and appreciate that today we have many people exploring and utilizing psychedelics from a microdosing standpoint, sub-therapeutic or sub-tripping doses, if you will, to sparkle the mind, to spark the imagination, to fuel creativity, to boost overall energy. And that is a very good and very valuable use, but it is not the trip. uh, Ayahuasca, in the best of circumstances, takes you on a powerful and radical journey into a visionary landscape that is part your imagination, part things that are brought in by the songs that the shamans sing, the ikaros, the healing songs that draw in plant spirits into the ceremonial space to assist in healing. The whole idea is that a soul, your soul, goes on a journey. Now, we have at this point in time a great many people working on the therapeutic applications of psychedelics, especially in clinical situations. We even see some utterly absurd patent chases. One group recently just tried to patent people sitting in soft chairs with eye shades on, listening to soft music and having their hand held as something unique and never before ever discovered in the world of tripping, which is just ludicrous. That's how crazy it's gotten out there. And there is no question that the therapeutic applications of psychedelics in clinical situations are very valuable. We saw this in the 1950s. Many hundreds of psychiatrists around the world utilized LSD and also utilized psilocybin in clinical settings with people who had different mental and emotional disorders to very, very beneficial effect. And here's what we discover with all of the psychedelics, and it specifically applies to ayahuasca, I think, in a rather brilliant way. The extent to which people have a profound mystical experience is the extent to which people heal. In one very well-known LSD study of alcoholism, treating alcoholics with LSD to rid them of their addiction to alcohol, it was those people in the study who had the most profound mystical or spiritual experiences, that sense of the self-dissolving, that sense of being unified with the all and the everything, that sense of being utterly tapped into and dissolved into the infinite wellspring of all life and imagination and creativity. It was that experience that delivered healing, that delivered freedom from addiction. In the Johns Hopkins University Medical Center study of stage 4 terminal cancer patients, we saw a similar situation. These people are dying. There is no, well, maybe we'll try this and see if that works. These people know they are going to die. And they were given psilocybin and in a clinical setting. And many of them, most of them, in fact, described later that they had the single greatest spiritual experience of their entire lives on psilocybin. And the greatest majority of them lost their fear of death. And this is compassionate medicine. But it takes going very, very far out. And I appreciate that people are carefully examining neurogenesis and the mushrooms. And I appreciate that people are figuring that new neural pathways arise when we're in that journeying or tripping state, when the psychedelics are really coming on full force. And that gives us a greater range of behavioral choices. And it is also the case that with the agents of nature, so ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, iboga, the mushrooms, we also have something else going on that exceeds biochemistry, and that is the spirit of the thing. You know it when you have the experience. It sounds like a metaphor to say that highly trained shamans who might be multi-generational, fifth, sixth generation shamans who've learned from their father or their mother or their grandmother or their grandfather or uncle or whatever, and who are carrying forth methods and practices that derive from antiquity, they understand how to take a person on a thorough and immersive journey, a radical journey, a journey that at least temporarily shatters the sense of self, that dissolves the ego identification that most of us walk around with all day long. And when that happens, that emergence into this greater ocean of energy, this greater ocean of vitality, perhaps even very, very surprising or confusing visions, all of these are part of a mysterious healing process. And as we think about the psychedelics, as we move forward with the pharmaceuticalization of these all over again, remember, Sandoz is where LSD was developed. Sandoz is where psilocybin was synthesized, and we had the drug indocybin. In the 1960s, ibogaine was already an anti-addiction pharmaceutical. We have utilized these things pharmaceutically before. We're just in a whole other round. We're in the psychedelic gold rush right now, where people are imagining billions of dollars of profits, every bit as much as good, well-intentioned people are imagining healing. But back to ayahuasca. In an ayahuasca ceremony, it is typical and common, whatever the tradition, to sit together in the dark. Most of these ceremonies happen at night. If you've drunk ayahuasca, you know that nobody yet has said, gosh, that's delicious ayahuasca, because it is a bitter, bitter brew. And it's also called la purga, the purge, because very often you vomit or otherwise purge after you've drunk ayahuasca. And that is all part of a cleansing process that is not only physical, but also emotional and spiritual. A Hawaiian elder I saw at an ethnobotany conference in the mid-90s said a wonderful and wise thing. He said, true healing puts into order the body, the mind, and the spirit with the past, the present, and the future. It is this reconciling of chaotic forces within us, this cleansing of behaviors that no longer serve our best and highest purposes, these impediments to our joy that prevent us from fully expressing what is possible in our deepest and most spiritual and creative selves. It is these things that get sorted out in an ayahuasca ceremony. And very often the effects are strange. When I first went to drink ayahuasca about 15 years ago or so, the second night of several nights of drinking in this ceremonial space, I was basically attacked by a gigantic psychedelic anaconda that hung over me for a couple of hours and pounded my chest with energy. And the feeling was so extraordinary and so intense and so violent, I was absolutely certain that I would have cracked ribs at the end of the night. And I didn't, but it was a remarkable ordeal to go through. And what I found is what people often find in the psychedelic space. The only way is through, and the only way through is to surrender. Embarking on the psychedelic journey, whether we're chewing thoughtfully on peyote buttons, whether we're eating a mash of huachuma, San Pedro cactus, also rich in mescaline, whether it's drinking iboga, whether it is chewing thoughtfully on the mushrooms, whether it's reaching for that dark, 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 mysterious, and very bitter glass of ayahuasca, all of it has to do with harmonizing the self. The highest purposes of the psychedelics get expressed in the healing process. The bringing together of our disparate forces, the harmonizing of our energies, the resolving of traumas, the elimination or the reduction of behaviors that no longer serve us. And this is a very wild process. I personally have been swallowed by creatures in the psychedelic space. I've had creatures swallow me. I've swallowed them. I've been showered with gold coins, have no idea what that means. Seen many strange things, the hands of time, and somehow deep inside all of this visionary experience, there is this constant, ongoing sense of the possibility of complete and radical and total healing and harmonization. And now today, in addition to the healing purposes that many people are turning to ayahuasca for, there is also a use that is not typical and traditional and common in antiquity, and that is utilizing ayahuasca as an agent for spiritual experience. Very often, the person who has a background in meditation, the person who has a practice in yoga, the person who is somehow engaged in mind-body discipline uses that background and those talents and those capacities as navigational skills in the spiritual space with ayahuasca, not only to understand their own healing process, but also to explore greater energies and greater dimensions beyond the individual self. So as we go forward in time, as we pharmaceuticalize psychedelics, as there is more and more scientific corroboration of things that we've known about these agents since antiquity, that they are among the greatest healers on earth, I also urge people to keep the psychedelics wild, to make sure that in addition to the clinical settings, that you're tripping in the woods, that you're tripping on the beach, that you're out in the meadows, that you're out in the fields, that you're in the water, that you're in the streams, that you're with your friends, that you're laughing in the sun, that you're enjoying the mysterious croaking of the frogs in the forests at night, the sound of the crickets chirping, the rustling of the bushes and the leaves. This is nature at its grandest, expressing itself in profound, powerful healing ways that are now finally easily and readily accessible to us. All I ask is keep them wild. Thank you very much.